Also. I welcome all the welcome my good friend Shailesh, the coordinator of this webinar. I welcome all the participants to this webinar. This webinar we have 7 talks. Scientists, the professor sir will be speaking on basics of by that Sebastian two sessions.
Dr. Ramesh, your voice is breaking. I don't know if we have any.
Yeah, actually, I couldn't make out most of what he said, unfortunately, because the voice was broken.
I could hear you, Sebastian. Well, I hope I am audible.
You are quite audible. No problems with when you speak. But with Dr. Ramesh, I couldn't understand actually.
It was breaking. I think someone was putting a message. Now you are muted, Dr. Ramesh.
Yes, sir. Very good morning to all of you. Welcome to 3-day webinar on physical chemistry. We have with us Professor Ayyappan, Chairman, Honorable Chairman, Karnataka Science and Technology Academy. He was the Director General of ICR, Secretary, Department of Agriculture, Research and Education, Government of India. He has taken over as the Chairman of KST in May 2020. Since then, we have been working under his guidance. Earlier to that, KSTA was started in the year 2005 under the chairmanship of Professor U.R. Rao, former chairman of ISRO. Under his guidance, we worked for nearly 17 years. KSTA has been able to cover the entire educational pyramid, right from high school to the university level, catering to the requirements of students studying at various levels. For this 3-day webinar, we have 7 talks by eminent scientists. First talk will be on basics of spectroscopy by Dr. Arunan, Professor Inorganic and Physical Chemistry, Department IISc. Sir is there with us. Hearty welcome to you, sir. Second and third talk of today will be by Professor K.L. Sebastian, sir, Professor and Dean, Academic Research, IIT Palakkad. Sir will be giving 2 talks on basics of quantum chemistry. On behalf of all of us, welcome to this webinar, sir. Thanks for accepting our invitation. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
Tomorrow we have 2 talks on principles and applications of NMR spectroscopy by Professor Siddharth P. Sharma, Professor IISc, followed by that a talk on Raman spectroscopy by Jyotishman Das Gupta of TIFR Mumbai. And on the last day, we have again 2 talks on quantum technologies by Dr. Saptarishi Chaudhary, RRI Bangalore. And the last talk will be on liquid crystals and their applications by Dr. S. Krishna Prasad of CENS Bangalore. For this inaugural function, we have with us Dr. Anand Kumari Madam, Principal of Siddhganga College. Welcome to you, Madam. And coordinator of this particular program, Dr. B.S. Shailesh, who helped me in identifying suitable topics and also experts for this particular webinar. Welcome to you, Doctor. And I welcome all the participants for this webinar. We have a good number of participants. I request all the participants to be attentive on all 3 days. Please keep your notebook and pen with you and jot down whatever experts say. On behalf of KSTA, welcome to you all. Now I request Dr. Anand Kumari Madam for her remark on this inaugural session. Please, Madam, for your remarks. Madam, matade.
Her phone is in mute. And
ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್
her
ಶೈಲೇಶ್ ಅವರ
mic is in mute.
ಮೈಕ್ ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ.
Yes, madam. No, you can speak.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, madam. We can hear you.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರಗಳು. I submit very good opportunity for us and to our students to understanding resource persons. Dr. Arunan E, Professor in Organic and Physical Chemistry Department of IISc Bangalore, Professor K.L. Sebastian, Professor and Dean, Academic Research, Indian Institute of Technology, Palakkad, Professor Siddhartha P. Sharma, Professor Molecular Biophysics Unit, IISc Bangalore, Dr. Jyotiman Dasgupta, Associate Professor, Department of Chemical Sciences, TIFR, Mumbai, Dr. Saptarshi Chowdhury, Associate Professor, Raman Research Institute, Bangalore, and Dr. S. Krishna Prasad, Emeritus Professor, Center for Nano and Chalk Material Sciences, Bangalore. It is a great opportunity for all of us and to our students to listen to the great lectures. I am grateful to Dr. Prakash M. Sobarat, Director, Karnataka Science and Technology Academy, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, for selecting our college as the associated college for this 3 days webinar on physical sciences. The lectures will be very useful to our student participants as all the lectures are on the portion they have in their syllabus for final year. I request all the students to make use of this useful rare opportunity to their best. I am extremely thankful to the Department of Science and Technology, especially the chairman of Karnataka Science and Technology Academy, KSTA, for giving this opportunity for our students. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. Now I request our chairman sir to give a presidential address.
Good morning. I hope I am audible and visible. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Greetings. Good morning to everyone here joining us on this 3-day seminar. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. E. Arunan, our professor from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, from the Department of Physical Chemistry, and also Professor K. Sebastian, the Dean of the IIT from Kerala. So to both of you, hearty welcome. We'd like to immensely thank you for being with us. We have with us at this time, as was mentioned, Dr. Ananda Kumari, Principal of the Siddhaganga College of Arts and Science in Kutumkur. And we have Dr. A.M. Ramesh, he is the Chief Executive Officer of the KSTA. So, and then a large number of student friends who are joined. With this, as was mentioned, we keep organizing these webinars on important science topics. And this time it's on physical chemistry. And as was mentioned, a list of distinguished speakers. And for today's meeting, we have Dr. As was again mentioned, Dr. Arunan and Professor Sebastian. We would have a wide range of topics. We have mainly on spectroscopy, quantum chemistry, nanotechnology, and several of those things that are very important today, including at the level of Nobel Prizes. This year, for example, several of them have drawn the global attention, and I'm sure our students will be immensely benefited with this series of lectures. And I won't take much time. And we would like, on behalf of the Karnataka Science Technology Academy, we would like to thank the speakers, resource persons, and the audience equally for being with us next 3 days. And Dr. Arunan, I'm grateful to you, and as also Professor Sebastian. With these words, I welcome all of you and request Dr. Arunan to kindly take over.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, before beginning the first technical session by Professor E. Arunan sir, I would like to introduce them. Professor E. Arunan sir did his BSc in chemistry from the American College, Madurai, and MSc from IIT Madras in 1984, and Masters in Technology in Modern Methods of Chemical Analysis and Control from IIT Delhi. He did his PhD with Professor Donald Sester at Kansas State University in 1991. After postdoctoral work at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with Professor Gutowski, after a brief stint at IIT Kanpur, he moved to the Department of Inorganic and Physical Chemistry. At the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where he is currently a professor and chair. He built a pulse nozzle Fourier transformer microwave spectrometer and also a single pulse shock tubes in collaboration with Aerospace Engineering Department. Experimental results from his group on weakly bound complexes of water and hydrogen sulfide led to fundamental understanding of hydrogen bonding. Following this, the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry asked Dr. Arunan to form a chair and task group to redefine hydrogen bonding. He led a task group and came up with a new definition of hydrogen bonding adopted by IUPAC in 2011. In 2013, his group discovered the carbon bond analogous to a hydrogen bond, and a growing community of chemists are exploring this area all over the world. The shock tube facilities created have been used to address both fundamental problems in chemical kinetics and measuring ignition delays of rocket fuels. He is an editor for the Journal of Molecular Structure and section editor Chemistry for Current Science. He is in the editorial board of Journal of Molecular Chemistry. He has been elected a fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Sciences, Royal Society of Chemistry, and International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. He is on the International Advisory Board for Horizons in Hydrogen Bond Research Conference, International Symposium on Shock Waves, International Conference on Non-Covalent Interactions, and Asian Spectroscopy Conference. With this brief introduction of Professor E. Arunan sir, I request you to take over the session, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, unmute yourself, sir. Unmute yourself and slideshow, sir.
Where do I find? Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good morning to all of you. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to thank the Karnataka Science and Technology Academy for the invitation to give a talk today. I'm going to talk to you about the basics of spectroscopy. The question is, why do molecules absorb or emit light? And why should we even care about them? I will begin my presentation. So I will give a classical view. I hope all of you are familiar with quantum mechanics, quantum chemistry. We have Professor Sebastian who will talk to you after me. If you have not learned quantum chemistry, you can find a better person to learn about that. I will not be talking about that. I will briefly mention about time-dependent perturbation theory, though I won't discuss about this, and how selection rules come from them. And then I will talk about some important applications of spectroscopy, both fundamental and applied. Ask what is spectroscopy? I can say we study the interaction of molecules or matter with radiation. Molecules or matter is basically chemistry, and radiation is physics. You know how we learned about physics and chemistry when I was in high school. They used to say chemistry is the study of matter and physics is the study of energy. And so it's basically the interface between physics and chemistry. Because I don't have this in the slide. If you know the equation of Einstein, the most famous equation, E equal to mc square, basically you showed that energy is equal to matter, and you might say physics is equal to chemistry. You can interpret it that way. Because these borders are artificial, but at times useful. In spectroscopy, we look at frequency of light, intensity, sensitivity, and line width, which gives the resolution, and all of them contain important information. And most importantly, spectroscopy for me is pattern recognition. You should be able to look at a spectrum and figure out why molecules absorb only some frequency or wavelength, why not others. Among the frequencies they absorb, is there any pattern that we can recognize, and what can we learn from that? Because why should we know? Who cares where and why molecules absorb? I'm going to put you some topics that you may all be familiar with, and I will convince you why spectroscopy is important in all of them. Stratospheric ozone depletion. I think everybody has heard about it, from politicians to common people. All of us know about the ozone depletion. Global warming, MRI scanning, microwave cooking, radiation therapy, mobile communication, radio, TV broadcasting, explosives, pollution detection, can go on and on. But in all this, spectroscopy and particularly the 5 basics are very important. In general, there is no spectroscopy without quantum chemistry. I'm not going to talk to you about quantum chemistry as such now, but let me show you. I hope my laser pointer is visible. The energy levels are quantized, that they are not continuous. We have some energy level here, one more here, and one more here. Classically, the energy could be continuous. Here, the y-axis is energy. But quantum mechanics tells us that only certain energies are allowed. And when you have this certain energies, transition between 2 levels, like here given in red, may be forbidden, and these 2 levels may be allowed. And of course, if you do time-dependent perturbation theory, you can prove them. But quantum mechanics is difficult to understand. We know it's real, we know it works, but it's really difficult to comprehend. It's not just my view. Feynman, one of the most famous physicists of 20th century, said this: if you think you have understood quantum mechanics, maybe you have missed something. But let's look at a classical picture first. Before I go on, let me look at the absorption spectrum of ozone. We will not study about this electronic absorption spectrum, 200 to 300 nanometer. In 1881, Walter Hartley recorded this spectrum, and this was done before the birth of quantum mechanics, before the structure of ozone was known, and before we knew E equal to h nu, that energy of a light is related to its frequency or wavelength. But the spectra could be recorded, and we could also record the solar radiation spectrum. This is a spectrum of radiation emitted by sun. And of course, we can say the emission comes from the surface of the sun. If you look at this, what is recorded is given here in dark line. This is outside the atmosphere. If you do the same measurement at sea level, I see that at some wavelengths, the intensity reaching Earth is much less. And at some wavelengths, like say 300 nanometer, all of it is gone. And you see these molecules that absorb this radiation, preventing it from coming to Earth, is shown here. So at the sea level, the light we get is very different. Remember, only from about 400 to 700 nanometer, our eyes are sensitive. So this is the visible light that we can see. You can see there's plenty of visible light reaching the Earth. But UV light at 300 nanometer is completely stopped. Another interesting thing is this dark line closely resembles the black body radiation at 5900 Kelvin. Now, if you've learned black body radiation, that's in fact the origin of quantum mechanics. Only by using this relation E equal to h nu, Planck could explain this black body radiation. If we did not put this E equal to h nu, the energy of the photon would all be the same, and that would expect the intensity to go on increasing like this. That's what the classical law was expecting. That would have been called ultraviolet catastrophe. But when you use this equation E equal to h nu, ultraviolet photons, which have very high frequency, have huge energy per photon. Infrared and microwave photons have lower frequency. They have less energy. And depending on the energy at a given temperature, only some photons are possible. So the number of photons in ultraviolet is less. So we have this peak rather than a catastrophe. So Planck used this radiation law to explain the black body radiation. And the beauty is that quantum hypothesis was needed. And we can use that to look at what is the temperature of sun. And I should be clear here, the surface of sun, not the core of sun where it could be millions of Kelvin. But the surface is at 5900 Kelvin, and we can measure it with spectroscopy standing on Earth. We don't really need to go to the sun. Here I am showing you the emission from Earth. I know how many of you are aware of this. Not only sun, Earth can also emit light. And of course, the emission from Earth happens because Earth absorbs the light from sun. But the temperature of Earth is typically about 300 Kelvin. So if you look at the emission from Earth, this is how it looks. Because how do you measure the emission from Earth? You have to get out of the Earth. So you can go in a satellite or balloon and point your spectrometer towards the Earth and record it. Now what's interesting is you can see the broad feature resembles 294 Kelvin black body emission. But what's interesting is right in the middle around 650, 700 wave number, we see a huge dip. And of course, I have shown here carbon dioxide. Earth is emitting this light in infrared region. And sun is emitting in UV visible, and visible light reaches us. UV light is stopped by ozone. Earth in turn reflects light back, and that's in the infrared region. And the light emitted by Earth is trapped by carbon dioxide. And that's what leads to global warming. I have pointed out some molecules which are like ozone is also absorbing light emitted by Earth. Maybe CH4, water. That's why these frequencies are less here, wave number. But what's interesting is that oxygen molecule has a vibrational frequency of 1580 wave number. I don't find oxygen here. If you think about it, all of us know atmosphere is full of nitrogen and oxygen, and they don't absorb the light emitted by Earth, but carbon dioxide does. And this is what leads to global warming. Why the carbon dioxide absorbs this light, but oxygen doesn't, you will see in this lecture. What's interesting is Arrhenius, I am sure all of you have heard about him, maybe not in spectroscopy or global warming, but as the Arrhenius activation energy in chemical kinetics. He published a paper on the influence of carbonic acid, the temperature of the ground. He predicted that carbon dioxide absorbing this infrared light could lead to increase of temperature by 5 degrees. Of course, this calculation was revised to indicate there could be 2-degree increase, and that we are almost getting close to there. The whole world is now working towards restricting it below 2 degrees because all of us realize global warming is real. Carbon dioxide causes global warming. Why doesn't nitrogen or oxygen cause global warming? And it depends on infrared spectra. Not only that, definition of time itself depends on atomic spectroscopy. That's how it was. But second is defined by taking the fixed numerical value of cesium frequency and put a ground state hyperfine transition. They equate that to this, and from this we defined the sexes. This wording of the definition was updated in 2019. In 2019, it defined based on the time. Now, meter is defined based on the velocity of light. You take the velocity of light given in 9 significant figures, 299, 792, 458 meter per second. So the meter and time, time and space are essential for us. The definition of meter and time depend on the in spectroscopy, the speed of light as well as the frequency of CCM emission. It's a slide showing the electromagnetic spectrum starting from radio frequency to microwave, infrared, visible, UV, X-ray, and gamma ray, and so on. The wavelengths here, it's a soccer field, it's like a water molecule, and at times you may even see nuclei. So the wavelengths vary over about 15 orders of magnitude. And when you see a graph like this, you can naturally ask, can we have a wavelength larger than this? Or can we have a wavelength shorter than this? I'm not aware of any fundamental restriction on this, but this is all we know. And in all these regions, light can interact with molecules. In radio frequency, we have NMR spectroscopy. In microwave, we have rotational microwave spectroscopy and electron spin distance spectroscopy. Infrared, we have vibrational spectroscopy, UV visible spectroscopies, electronic spectroscopy normally. And in X-ray and gamma ray, we can look at nuclear energy levels and mass Bayer spectroscopy. Now, why do these molecules absorb or emit light? I was telling you in microwave spectroscopy, we have rotational spectroscopy. Here I have shown a typical molecule. Maybe you can think of as a diatomic molecule. If I want this molecule to rotate, if I can hold this molecule either by hand or with some tool, I can keep spinning the molecule. I can rotate the molecule if I can hold it. But molecules are so tiny, we cannot hold them. But if we realize that the molecules may have a dipole moment, for example, electric dipole or even a magnetic dipole shown here, I don't need to hold the molecule. If I can bring another magnet or electric field, that's what light has. And if I start spinning that, it's like you have a magnet here, I keep another magnet and keep moving the magnet, the molecule would follow. Light has this electric and magnetic field, and the molecules can follow this. So when the light is shined on the molecule, as the electric field in the light oscillates, the molecule may also oscillate. Oscillating electric field can induce vibrations and rotations corresponding to the same frequency. Of course, this is a classical way of thinking about it. We know all the light is not absorbed, only select frequencies are absorbed. And for that, you need quantum mechanics, because this would indicate that light of any frequency can lead to vibration or rotation. That is not possible. But this basically gives a classical way of why molecules may absorb light and then get excited to doing rotation and vibration. Why do they emit light? Of course, here I have shown the light itself. If you look at the electric field, it may be going up and down like this in x-axis. Magnetic field is orthogonal, we can call it y-axis. The light is traveling in the direction orthogonal to both of them, which is z. In general, the wavelength of light is much more larger than the molecular dimension. So what the molecule feels is constant field, because the molecules are only nanometer or angstrom. So whatever the molecule is feeling is constant electric field or magnetic field, which is varying in time. Now, where do the molecules emit? I hope all of you can see this. If we look at a molecule like hydrogen fluoride, it has a dipole moment, let's say it is 1. The molecule is like this. The dipole moment along this axis is 1. The molecule rotates by 90 degrees. It still has a dipole moment. However, the dipole moment in this axis now would be 0. Because remember, light also has electric fields in specific axis. I had shown this as Z. That is true if the light is plane polarized, like in the XZ plane. But in general, the light we have has electric field in all directions. If you use a tube light or any other source, you have electric fields in all directions. We do have lasers which are plane polarized. We can plane polarize lights. So when we deal with them, the direction of electric field and the direction of dipole moment is important. When the molecule rotates by 90 degrees, the dipole moment along this axis is 0. When it's rotated by 180 degrees, the dipole moment has become negative. When it rotates by 270 degrees, the dipole moment is 0. When it's again 360 degrees, the dipole moment is back to what it was. So when the molecule is rotating by this axis, the hydrogen fluoride molecule is rotating, I have an oscillating dipole, electric dipole. An oscillating dipole emits radiation corresponding to the frequency of oscillation, and this was well known in classical electrodynamics. Remember, we had bulbs like Edison invented the bulb. You have charges oscillating, that's how he produced the bulb. This was known classically. Let me see if this works. I need to show some simulation. Let me see. I can stop this.
Sir, stop sharing this presentation, then go to
I will stop the presentation and
Yes, sir.
share my screen.
Yes, sir.
So I'm just sharing my screen now. You can see a piece of me at the corner and other thing. What I was showing is that, I hope you can see this. When the molecule is rotating like this, and I have defined this as the y-axis, the dipole moment about the y-axis is oscillating. As long as this oscillation happens, there will be emission. This way, when a molecule is rotating, only if it has a permanent dipole moment, we'll have a dipole moment oscillating. I put two different colors here. If a molecule like oxygen or nitrogen are rotating, they have no dipole moment to begin with, and even when they rotate, there won't be any oscillating dipole, and we won't have a emission. Now, why do the molecules emit when they vibrate? If you remember what I had shown in the slide, I had chosen the hydrogen fluoride molecule. Hydrogen fluoride molecule does have a dipole moment to begin with, but during the vibration, the dipole moment changes. Dipole moment is basically charge times the distance, because the vibration, the distance changes, and then the dipole moment changes. If you're wondering why I made this simulation with NO rather than hydrogen fluoride, the center of mass is important. In hydrogen fluoride, fluorine is heavy. The vibration would look more like this, where the hydrogen atom moves more than the fluorine atoms, because the center of mass would not change at all. In NO, both atoms have approximately the same mass. So because after the simulation was done by a student, I found out that atoms were moving with equal amplitude. So I changed hydrogen fluoride to nitrogen oxide. So during the vibration, we need to have a change in dipole moment, and then we have an oscillating dipole, and then we have rotation. During the rotation, the dipole moment about an axis varies if there is a permanent dipole moment. What's more interesting is that if we have a molecule like carbon dioxide does not have a dipole moment to begin with. So if carbon dioxide rotates, there won't be any emission. But if carbon dioxide has this asymmetric stretching mode, where one CO bond becomes short, another CO bond becomes long, then you can have oscillating dipole about this axis, and there can be an emission. So asymmetric stretching leads to an oscillating dipole, and that can emit. And if you look at the bending modes of carbon dioxide, looks like this. Now the dipole moment is oscillating in another direction. Now this is the direction. If you remember, during the stretching mode, the dipole moment was oscillating in the Z direction. During the bending mode, the dipole moment is oscillating in the Y direction. Now if we bring light which has only Z electric field components. That would not excite this. If we bring light with electric field in the Y direction, that could excite this. And of course, to do experiment like this, we should be able to fix carbon dioxide in some specific location and define this axis. If carbon dioxide is in free space, it will be randomly oriented and the light has random electric field. But it is possible to do experiments in which we can freeze carbon dioxide and keep it stable in some direction and bring lights of specific electric field and verify this. The same carbon dioxide molecule also has another vibration, which is symmetric stretching mode. During the symmetric stretching mode, the dipole moment does not change at all. So at the equilibrium distance, it has zero dipole moment. Even during symmetric stretching mode, there is no oscillating dipole moment. So this band cannot absorb or emit infrared light. It's not that carbon dioxide cannot execute the symmetric stretching mode. It can execute, but the infrared radiation would not be emitted when there is an excitation like this. Or if we shine light of infrared light of the same frequency, carbon dioxide cannot absorb this either, because there is no change in dipole moment. I'm going to stop sharing this now and go back to my presentation. I hope you can all see the presentation again.
Yes,
I was
sir.
just
Perfect, sir.
explaining to you why hydrogen fluoride vibration leads to a similar oscillation and rotation leads to a similar oscillation. Here it shows the carbon dioxide bending mode. I had shown you the simulation. We have an oscillating dipole. During the asymmetric stretching also we have an oscillating dipole. But symmetric stretch of carbon dioxide does not lead to an oscillating dipole. So this would not absorb or emit radiation. Most often the electric field interacts with the molecules several orders of magnitude stronger than the magnetic field. So we have electric dipole transitions. For rotations, we need a permanent dipole. For vibrations, we need a change in dipole moment. And for Raman spectroscopy, of course, I hope all of you are aware of Raman. He was in the Indian Institute of Science. He discovered the Raman effect while at Indian Association for Cultivation of Science in Calcutta. But he announced it in Bangalore and moved to Bangalore pretty soon. Raman spectroscopy is very different from the microwave and infrared spectroscopy I was talking to you about. In Raman, we talk about polarizability. Polarizability basically tells how polarizable a molecule is. A molecule like hydrogen or carbon dioxide does not have a dipole moment. But if you bring a charge closer to the hydrogen molecule, can it polarize? Light is an oscillating electric field. So if light interacts with the molecule, can it polarize the molecule? Can it induce a dipole moment? And of course, it can induce a dipole moment. And the Raman signals will depend on how strongly this polarizability is. In Raman, there is no absorption or emission, but we have scattering. And that depends on the polarizability. The dipole moment itself, let me show the pointer again. The dipole moment depends on polarizability times the electric field. But this is a matrix equation because dipole moment and electric field are vectors. I kept emphasizing that the oscillating dipole in carbon dioxide varied along the molecular axis for asymmetric stretching and perpendicular to the molecular axis for bending mode. So electric field can also be in XYZ direction. So we have the electric field XYZ. The dipole moment can also be in XYZ direction. And the polarizability is a matrix, a three-dimensional matrix. You know, how many of you are familiar with this term tensor? Everything is a tensor. In fact, energy is a tensor of order 0. It does not depend on any direction. It's a scalar quantity. Dipole moment and electric field are vectors. They are like tensor of order 1. They depend on the direction. But polarizability depends on two dimensions. Electric field has a dimension, dipole moment has a dimension. What it implies is if I bring electric field along x-axis, it will induce dipole moment along x-axis and the coefficient would be alpha xx. When I bring electric field along y-axis, it can also induce dipole moment along x-axis and the coefficient would be alpha xy. Now I hope all of you can understand this. Dx would depend on these three coefficients, dy would depend on these three, and dz would depend on these three. And this would be the case if this polarizability matrix is not diagonal. Suppose for every molecule I find a diagonal coordinate system. So only these diagonal elements are non-zero. Then if I bring the electric field in x-axis, it will induce dipole moment only along x-axis. If I bring electric field along y-axis, it will induce dipole moment only along y-axis. And that is possible. For every molecule, we can find out these coordinates in which the polarizability is diagonal. But what is more important is there can be three directions. If we look at this hydrogen molecule, it has no dipole moment. I can call this as z-axis and these two axes as x and y. And as you can imagine, hydrogen has a cylindrical symmetry. X and y are arbitrary, but z-axis is unique. Now, if I bring a light from this direction, let's say, it will induce a dipole moment along this direction only. Now, if I bring a light from x and y directions, it would also induce a dipole moment, but this need not be the same as what the light along z direction produces. So we have some kind of anisotropic polarizability. So depending on which direction the light is applied, the dipole moment induced would be different. And suppose I keep the light in only one direction, but hydrogen molecule is rotating when the light is acting on it. When it is parallel to the direction of light, it will have a dipole moment. When it is perpendicular, the dipole moment would be different now, induced dipole moment. So we'll have an oscillating dipole because of this. For example, I have this light, I have a molecule, let's say take a molecule like methane. Suppose this methane molecule is rotating when the light is interacting with this. The induced dipole moment would not change at all because methane has isotropic polarizability. Whichever direction the light comes, the induced dipole moment will be the same. But for hydrogen and carbon dioxide, that is not the case. When carbon dioxide rotates, the induced dipole moment will change. But what's interesting about this is, if we look at carbon dioxide and methane again, I shine light, the polarizability does not change when the methane rotates. But in carbon dioxide, when the light is parallel to this, let's say I have this arbitrary dipole moment. When it rotates by 90 degrees, the dipole moment is different now because it's looking like this. But what's interesting is when I rotate it by 180 degrees, the dipole moment is again back to where it was. Remember, when you looked at the overall rotation of the molecule, only after 360-degree rotation, the dipole moment came back to what it was originally. But when you look at the polarizability induced dipole moment, within 180 degrees, it's back to where it was. 270 degrees different, 360 degrees again the same. When the molecule rotates one time, the dipole moment oscillates at twice the frequency. Some of you may have learned in Raman spectroscopy, typically delta J can be 0 or plus minus 2. This is a classical way of understanding why it is plus or minus 2. It can also be 0, and for that you would need quantum mechanics. If we look at the Raman vibrational spectroscopy, during asymmetric stretching mode, the induced dipole moment does not change. For example, if you look at a molecule like hydrogen, it is polarizable, but if I stretch the molecule, it will become more polarizable. What do you mean by it becomes more polarizable? The electrons between the two nuclei will have less control by the nuclei when you are stretching it. So it becomes more polarizable. When you compress it, it becomes less polarizable. But here in CO2, you are compressing one bond and stretching another bond. So the polarizability does not change at all during this asymmetric stretching mode. But during the symmetric stretching mode, it changes. Some of you may have heard about this. There's a mutual exclusion principle between infrared and Raman. This one way to understand this. In carbon dioxide, asymmetric stretching and bending mode are infrared active, but symmetric stretching is Raman active, because during stretching, symmetric stretching, polarizability changes, the dipole moment doesn't change. Asymmetric stretching and bending mode, dipole moment changes. Dipole moment varies as x, y, and z. Polarizability varies as x square, x, y, and y, z, and so on. So the one is an odd function and another is an even function. So basically, the classical picture of the scattering is that the induced dipole moment depends on both alpha, which is the polarizability, and D, which is the electric field. Alpha changes during rotation and vibration plus omega I, small I, this is the rotational or vibrational frequency. Alpha E is the polarizability equilibrium distance. Electric field itself changes, oscillates with the incident light's frequency omega capital I. When I multiply these two terms, I have sine A, sine B. Many of you are familiar with this. The alpha E and U naught would give the sine omega IT. This is scattering, which is called as Rayleigh scattering. The scattered photon has the same frequency as the incident photon. But you will also have scattering, because sine A, sine B term is cos A minus B and cos A plus B. Omega I minus omega small I, omega I plus omega capital I. This is normally called the Stokes scattering, where the scattered light has a smaller, lower frequency. This is called anti-Stokes Raman, where the scattered frequency is larger than the incident frequency. It's a classical way of understanding them. We really need quantum mechanics to derive and prove all of them. How do we do quantum mechanics? Of course, we have molecule like ethyl chloride here, or any molecule. It has a zeroth order Hamiltonian, which depends on the charges within the molecule. There is attraction between positive, negative charges, repulsion between like charges. Include all of them and write the Hamiltonian, which is zeroth order Hamiltonian. And you include a perturbation, which is time dependent, because whenever you turn the lights on, you have an electric field coming from the light. It turns out for most cases, the electric field from the light is about 8 orders of magnitude smaller than the field within the molecule. So this is a small perturbation. I'm not going to tell you about this. This is the time dependent Schrodinger equation. Maybe Sebastian would, in some of them, the needs for them and so on. Let me just tell you one thing. The time dependent Schrodinger equation is a first order differential with respect to time. Newton's equation is a second degree differential. You have a dx square by dt square. So if you want to find anything about a system in classical mechanics, we need to know two things. For example, you need to know the position and velocity for a molecule, so you can predict the past and future accurately. But in quantum mechanics, we know the uncertainty principle violates this. It just cannot, it's not possible to mention position and momentum simultaneously and accurately. So it'd be good to have a first degree differential. So if you know the wave function at some time t, you can find out the wave function at any other time. But the wave function only gives the probability based on psi square, and that's what we have to live with. So what is the h prime? That's basically the charge. We have the interaction between electric field and the charges in the molecule, magnetic field and the charges in the molecule. If you look at this, the magnetic field interaction is ratioed by this velocity of the molecule by the speed of light. And that's why the interaction with the magnetic field is always less. If we consider only the electric field, it's electric field times the dipole moment. And we see that it oscillates as cos omega t. Dipole moment is oscillating with something. But when you take this dot product Einstein wrote this cos omega t as exponential I omega t plus exponential minus I omega t. You know, how many of you are familiar with this? By definition, cos and sine functions can be written as the sum of this imaginary exponential functions, I omega t and exponential minus I omega t. This I is clearly the square root of -1. I hope you have all heard about this. I really don't like this small I. It's a real complication, square root of -1. But Einstein wrote this expression. We have exponential I omega t and exponential minus I omega t for this Hamiltonian. And when you look at the interaction between molecules and light, he took the energy levels from the unperturbed Hamiltonian. These are 0th order energy levels. He said the interaction with light will produce some other energy level which should be within this Ek naught. Basically, the time independent Schrodinger equation gives us a set of energy levels. This can form a basis set. And when you use time dependent perturbation theory, any of the new state can be explained as a linear combination of all these basis sets. This is very similar to what I have shown here. I'm sure all of you know about this vector R, which we can write as unit vector along x, y, and z directions I, j, and k. We can write ix plus jy plus kz. Any R can be represented by the same way. So all the eigenfunctions that we calculate with time-independent Schrodinger equation can form a basis for finding out the actual wave function after this interaction. So we have all this level. Suppose we started at some level m. We are going to interact with light. Where does it go after the interaction? That's what we are going to see. This is the 0th order wave function, which is the energy level Ek naught. Light, if you remember, has these two exponential functions. When you look at the interaction of light and molecule with this, we have these two exponential functions here, and we had one there. And our final solution, which is the probability of finding the molecule in any other state based on this coefficient. What's interesting is that it depends on this dipole moment operator. This is known as the transition moment integral. This integral would be non-zero only if it satisfies the classical conditions I spoke about. For rotational spectroscopy, we need to have a change in dipole moment. And for vibrational spectroscopy, we need to have an oscillating dipole and so on. So this takes care of the selection rule based on the properties: dipole moment, oscillating dipole moment, permanent dipole moment, polarizability, and so on. In addition to that, there are two resonance conditions, and that comes because the light was exponential I omega n and exponential minus I omega t and minus I omega t. So if you look at this term, this coefficient will be very large when omega mn is equal to omega, because this term would become 0. Of course, it doesn't go to infinite because we also have this 0 in the numerator, and we can use the limits to find out what this value is, but this would be very large when this condition is matched. So when omega mn is equal to omega, we have molecule here, and it can absorb light. This molecule was in n state, it can absorb and go to the m state. But if omega mn is equal to plus omega, what does it mean? Or minus omega? Molecule must have been here initially, and then on interacting with light, it can go down. I only spoke about how the oscillating dipoles can lead to emission of light. When the molecule is excited, it can oscillate and emit light. That's a classical view. That's what we get in a semi-classical treatment as well. But what Einstein showed here is that when you shine light on a molecule, it can induce emission. So this emission is induced by light when the molecule is in an excited state. This is what leads to lasers, light amplification by stimulated emission of light. And Einstein could predict this in 1915, even though it took 40-50 years before laser could be made. And now we call this as a laser pointer, even though I don't have a laser in my hand. This is what we would do if I were giving the lecture in person. And he predicted this accurately just by realizing that exponential cos omega t is exponential I omega t minus exponential I minus A omega t, plus minus, and so on. So maths is complicated, imaginary number is complicated, but once you know that, you can predict something that would lead to really fundamental advances, which are extremely useful. So if this condition is not matched, then it can be applied. Symmetry plays a major role. We will talk about this. And we can look at the dipolement, and this is a change in dipolement as a function of this coordinates. And if we can write this as a power series. All this would lead to delta V plus minus 1, plus minus 2, and so on. And I'll skip some of them. And I had already explained this. I think I will spend the last few minutes. They have to stop around 12, isn't it?
12:10, up to 12:10 you can continue, sir. 5 to
Okay,
10 minutes.
up to 12:10. So I have some more time. So I can
Yes, sir.
spend some more time.
Yes, sir.
So we can predict all the selection rules based on these transient moment integrals. Dipolement can be written as a power series in terms of this distance between the two atoms, or for a polyatomic molecule, we call them normal coordinates. This leads to the permanent dipolement rotational selection rules. This is the change in dipolement giving delta V plus minus 1. This will give us delta V plus minus 2 and delta V 0. Delta V plus minus 3, and so on. These are called first overtone, second overtone in the spectrum. It's already mentioned, Einstein could predict the stimulated emission by assuming an equilibrium. When I have only two states, when there is a light, it can stimulate absorption or stimulate emission. But even when there is no light, there can be spontaneous emission. If there is complete equilibrium between light and molecule, the radiation density and intensity will be given by the Planck's radiation law, which we discussed. And the population between N and M level would be given by the Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution, which you may have studied. And we can equate them. The emission can be by two steps, which is stimulated or spontaneous. Absorption is always stimulated. We equate these two, and we can derive the Einstein coefficient for spontaneous emission. In terms of this, you see that the spontaneous emission now depends on mu cube. This tells us why the lifetime is very different between electronic excited states and vibrational or rotational or NMR excited states. And if you all studied this, normally we say the fluorescence lifetime is in nanoseconds, because it's usually in the UV visible light when the nu cube is very large. And if you've learned about NMR spectroscopy, tomorrow Siddharth Sharma is going to talk about NMR spectroscopy. The excited states can stay on for seconds. So this nu cube dependence tells you that. And this integral tells the selection rules that we have learned so far. I already mentioned radio frequency gives nuclear spin and NMR spectroscopy. Microwave spectroscopy can be used to do molecular rotation as well as electron spin. Infrared gives the vibrational spectroscopy. UV and visible give electronic excitations. UV and X-ray can give electronic excitation of core electrons. X-ray and UV can also give core electron excitation leading to photoelectron spectroscopy. In gamma rays, which chemists normally don't use, we can look at the nuclear energy levels. Just showed you the absorption spectrum of ozone in the beginning. Now we can use the Beer-Lambert law to measure the ozone concentration in the atmosphere. See, if there was no ozone, if you remember, this is a nanometric angstrom here. It's like 280 to 340 nanometer. If you remember, the radiation from sun would be like this, except for the ozone presence in the atmosphere. Now you look at what would have been the intensity without ozone and measure actually what is the intensity that you are getting. You can estimate the concentration of ozone here. If you had only 2 millimeter ozone, this intensity would have come down here, this 4 millimeter would have come down here, and so on. Now, this is like Beer-Lambert's law that you would have learned. By comparing intensities at two different wavelengths here, there is no effect of ozone at all. We can estimate the ozone concentration and actually plot them. How do we do this experiment? We keep the spectrometer at the earth level and look at these two intensities, and maybe put the spectrometer in a balloon and keep taking it up. If you see, there are 2 points here, one measured during the ascent, another measured during descent. And this is important in science. You should be able to measure, make multiple measurements, and they have to agree. I'm sure most of the students must have done titrations. The instructor would tell you you should get 2 concomitant readings. 2 readings should agree. I know how often the readings really agreed, or sometimes students may say, I got the same reading, But it's important that if you do the experiment right, you get the same reading. You can see that they are almost the same. Basically, they have gone only up to 40 kilometers. What's interesting is that at the ground level, there is not much ozone. And as you go on higher level, and this is what we call as the stratosphere, and we can see this ozone concentration very high in stratosphere. If you look at the date, this is 1984, and this was being done all over the world for almost 100 years, even before we understood quantum mechanics and we understood the structure of ozone. In 1987, when these experiments were done in Antarctic, in August, we saw something very similar, but in November, you see that ozone disappeared. And this what led to almost like a crisis situation. It led to a Nobel Prize eventually, because scientists who explained this ozone depletion based on spectroscopy got the Nobel Prize. But this led to the global understanding and all the substances that can lead to ozone depletion, like chlorofluorocarbons. This is a colorful picture of ozone hole. This is Antarctic. You can see ozone hole, 1983 October, 1980 October. So this is all basic spectroscopy. When the UV visible spectrum of ozone was being recorded in the lab, it may have been done mainly because the faculty advisor who asked the student to measure the spectrum may have been curious to know where ozone absorbs, and then student may have recorded, or maybe the scientist itself may have recorded. But we have no way of predicting what would be the consequences. Here is carbon monoxide emission from the automobile. We can measure it at different temperatures, and we see the carbon monoxide emission, and we can understand all this emission if you know the spectroscopy and vehicle exhaust. Now, this is how they select a catalytic converter to put on the exhaust. We can look at the carbon monoxide emission with and without the converter and say this converter would work and the emission would be free of carbon monoxide. See, carbon monoxide is a poison that I hope all of you are aware of that. At times in a locked car, if a child sleeps inside the car, they die mainly because if the AC was running all the time, there could be some carbon monoxide inside the vehicle. And if you don't ventilate it and go on breathing it, you would die. Hydrogen cyanide is a poison, but it has a smell, and we can smell it at a concentration much lower than a lethal concentration. Carbon monoxide is a invisible poison. We cannot even smell. And of course, we can use spectroscopy to find it. Rotational spectroscopy can give the structure. This is a spectrum of argon and neon, which has a dipole moment, and I can get the rotational constant and the structure accurately. This is a spectrum of H2S dimer. We showed the structure is exactly like this, and we showed this is the hydrogen bond. As introduced, I was mentioned. we could define hydrogen bonding just by looking at the structure accurately. To do infrared spectroscopy, we can measure how strong a bond is. The vibrational frequency is related to this force constant times the dipole induced mass, not the dipole moment, it's mu induced mass. For example, H2, this vibrational frequency is very large and the force constant is large. And for Cl2, the frequency is very low and the force constant is low. We can also do some serious dynamics. If I react hydrogen with HOD molecule where I have one deuterium, can I selectively form OD or OH? These are questions physical chemists would ask. For doing this, we should understand spectroscopy very well. Let me just show you two vibrational modes. Each molecule has 3n-6 vibrational modes. If you look at the vibrations of H2O, I have three possibilities. This is symmetric stretching. The frequency is 3800 wave number. This is a calculated frequency, not experimental one. To do asymmetric stretching, it is 3900 wave number. Bending is 1622 wave number. In water molecule itself, even though we have two OH bonds, we cannot have this OH stretching and this OH stretching. Because of symmetry, they combine to give a symmetric combination and antisymmetric combination. But suppose I make it HOD, the symmetry is broken, the vibrations are very different. If we look at the HOD vibrational modes here, the bending frequency is slightly smaller. What's interesting is one mode is concentrated on the OD bond, another mode is concentrated on the OH bond, and that is very similar to what the water frequency at 3800 number, but the OD is very small. Now suppose I can excite this water molecule in this mode and then react it with hydrogen atom, I can produce H2 plus OD selectively. If I can excite this mode and react it with hydrogen atom, I can produce HD plus OH selectively. So by understanding this vibrational modes, we can influence chemical reactions. I told you global warming depends on carbon dioxide. The molecule has 4 different vibrational modes. This is a symmetric stretching mode. I told you this is not infrared active, it's Raman active. It's an antisymmetric stretching mode. This is Raman inactive but infrared active. These are the bending modes. They happen to be around 700 wave number, very close to almost at the center of what Earth is emitting. And this mode can absorb infrared light, as we found out, because there is a change in dipole moment during this. And this is what causes global warming. And during the vibrations of nitrogen and oxygen molecules, there is no oscillating dipole. Even though atmosphere has 99% of nitrogen and oxygen, they do not absorb the infrared light emitted by Earth. Now, if you think about it, this would sound really dramatic. How do we have only nitrogen and oxygen in the atmosphere? And how did we have ozone in the stratosphere? Ozone is stopping the UV light and carbon dioxide is preventing the infrared light from escaping. Now, global warming is usually talked about as a bad thing. But without this carbon dioxide absorbing infrared light and keeping the earth warm, this is called greenhouse effect, as I'm sure many of you may have heard about this. If you go to botanical garden, you can see the greenhouse. Basically, the greenhouse traps the heat. So that's what the carbon dioxide does. If carbon dioxide was not there in the atmosphere at all, Earth would have been at 240 Kelvin, not at 300 Kelvin, where we can comfortably live. But it's just that in the last 200 years, we have been adding more and more carbon dioxide due to industrialization, and the Earth's temperature is increasing by 1 or 2 degrees, and that can be dangerous for us. And all these are based on simple spectroscopy. I told you magnetic resonance imaging initially. This is based on NMR spectroscopy. What we are seeing is basically the water resonances, nothing more, nothing less. And anytime we have a cancerous cell, the absorption is slightly different, and that we can match. The microwave oven, again, it depends on mostly water. Both in MRI and microwave, it is water in the food in microwave that absorbs the microwave radiation and heated. I'm sure almost most of you may have a microwave oven at home. The traditional way of heating, we keep a fire and put our vessel on top of it. Vessel gets heated and then it transfers it to the food. In microwave heating, food is directly transferred. Often the vessel would be at room temperature. And it's important to use vessels that cannot be absorbed in microwave. So this is really useful. And of course, if you think about heat capacity, you may wonder what is thermo spectroscopy to do with it. How the molecules can absorb heat depends on this also. In spectroscopy, we can measure all the energy levels and we can actually calculate the heat capacity. Symmetry plays very important role as well. I had not talked about this. In hydrogen and water molecules, we talk about ortho and para forms. Some of you may have heard about it. When you heat molecules, ortho and para forms cannot exchange energy, and that affects the heat capacity. So when you calculate the heat capacity of water or H2 molecule, they will behave like two different molecules. And that also again, spectroscopy can be used. This is the NQR spectra of explosives like RDX, HMX, TNT, and so on. All of them have nitrogen, and nuclear quadrupole resonance is useful. We can detect explosives. This again NQR spectra of explosives. I'll complete my talk again by showing this electromagnetic spectrum. This is slightly different. We have several wavelengths, frequencies. In each of them, the light can interact with molecules or matter, solids, liquid, gases. And this gives us important information both to understand the molecules and their nature, as well as for creating new techniques or helping us. The laser pointer today is extremely useful. We have it in the supermarkets. But when Einstein just wrote exponential I omega t as exponential I omega t, cos omega t as a sum of exponential I omega t plus exponential minus I omega t, he was just following the maths. He realized it's important to look at both forms, and he predicted stimulated emission. When ozone's electronic absorption spectroscopy was measured, we have no idea ozone was there in the stratosphere, and it was in fact stopping the UV radiation from light. When carbon dioxide infrared spectrum and Raman spectrum were measured, we had no idea Earth is emitting infrared radiation, it is carbon dioxide that is stopping it. Now, because we understand this, we can find out the dangers involved in other inventions of science. In fact, chlorofluorocarbon was developed by chemists. When it was developed, it was thought to be heaven sent because we could use it in refrigerators, air conditioners. Now, air conditioners and refrigerators are not necessarily bad because we can store blood now. When it is too hot, we can live comfortably. That may seem like a luxury, but we can store blood. That is certainly a necessity to save life. So air conditioners and refrigerators are important. And chlorofluorocarbon did not react with anything. Now we can make a refrigerator out of carbon dioxide as ammonia as well. But ammonia or methane, if you use as a refrigerant, can catch fire. Ammonia can also react with food. Chlorofluorocarbon was ideal because it was very inert. It didn't catch fire. But when chlorofluorocarbon was released in the atmosphere, when it went to stratosphere, it was reacting with ozone, it was affecting. So invention of chlorofluorocarbon was useful for creating refrigerator and air conditioners, but we also understood that it could affect the ozone layer. So now scientists have come up with freons, as they are called, which can cool the refrigerator and air conditioners, but that would not affect the ozone layer. At times, a discovery in science can lead to unintended consequences. but we should not blame science because science is no moral. But if we understand, we can correct them and then progress further. To stop here, I have given 2 books. Any of you are interested in this, can go through them. I will be happy to answer any questions you have from anybody. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. From basics to research level only, you have taken us to in this journey of spectroscopy related things, sir. As of now, there are no questions from the participants. I request all the attendees or participants to give their.
Shall I stop sharing now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can stop sharing, sir. Any questions from the participants? I request them to raise the hand by giving your feedback in the icon or mention in the chat box or Q&A section. There are many feedbacks regarding your presentation, sir. Very useful and concentrated dose of information to understand what is all spectroscopy about. Thank you very much, Basuraju, sir. Sir, I think there are no questions from the participants as of now. And also we are taking questions offline also from the feedback form.
Sure.
That is the case. If we receive many questions in that, we will contact you and we will get the answers, sir.
Well, certainly, I'll be happy to respond
Yeah,
whenever
sure.
I can.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you very much, sir, once again on this wonderful topic. I requested our CEO, Dr. Ramesh, sir, to have few words.
Sir, it was a very informative and enlightening talk. I had studied physics 40 years ago. Now, really, I got to know what spectroscopy is. Thank you very much for a very informative and enlightening talk. In KSTA, we have a good training center. We'll be organizing regular workshops. I'll be requesting you to come over to KSTA, which is near to IISc. We are in GKVK campus to deliver a distinguished talk. For now, thank you very much, sir. Very kind of you for accepting our invitation.
I'll be happy to come when travel becomes possible and we can meet in
sir.
person.
Yes, sir.
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, once again. Now, before beginning the second session by Professor K.L. Sebastian, sir, I would like to introduce them. Professor K.L. Sebastian, sir, has done his education from Kerala University, BSc, and from Calicut University, MSc, and PhD from Department of Inorganic and Physical Chemistry, IISc. After that, sir has done 4 postdoctoral degrees in IISc, in University of Liverpool, and in Munich, respectively from the Professor S.K. Rangarajan, Professor T.B. Grimley, and Professor Gerard Ettel. After that, sir worked as a lecturer and reader at Calicut University from 1976 to 1984, and as a professor at Cochin University from 1984 to 1996, and then professor invited to be a professor at IISc, and sir is also Amrut Modi Chair Professor at IISc and JC Bose Fellow, and currently Professor and Dean of Research at IIT Palakkad. Sir was also visiting scientist and professor at National Institute for Advanced Industrial Science and Technology, Tsukuba, Japan, and Max Planck Institute for Polymer Research, Mainz, Germany, and University of Milan, Pecocca, Italy. Sir has received many awards and fellowships, in which I would like to mention here few. Fellowship of the Indian Academy of Sciences and Fellow of National Academy of Sciences, S.S. Bhatnagar Prize in Chemical Sciences, and M.E. Paili Award for Outstanding Academician. Chemical Research Society of Indian Silver Medal in 2005 and Gold Medal 2020. Congratulations, sir. And sir was an editorial board member of Journal of Theoretical and Computational Nanosciences and editor for Resonance Journal for 3 years. And also, sir is chairman in Science Education Panel of the Academies for 2 years during 2015 to 2016, and Vice President of Indian Academy of Science from 2015 to 2017. Currently Professor and Dean at IIT Palakkad, including academic research. Sir has many research interests in which he has made significant contributions to on a variety of problems in theoretical chemistry like theory of chemisorption, dynamical effects in tunneling, principle of maximum hardness, yes sir, molecular devices, and FRET to graphene, barrier crossing by a long chain molecule, and anomalous diffusion have attracted considerable attention. With this brief introduction, I request Sebastian sir to give a presentation on basics of quantum chemistry. Sir, can you now share your presentation on screen? Please check, sir.
Screen, it's not possible even now.
Yes, sir.
I don't know. I mean, without my screen, it is difficult for me to do anything.
Just a minute, sir. Now you try, sir.
No, I can see it. It is not possible for me to share.
Because I have changed the privileges also, sir.
Can you make me the host
Yes, sir.
itself? I
Yes,
know
sir.
you are the host, but
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. After that, I will be losing the controls. That time, you will be able to control, sir, everything.
yeah, well, I know.